Joe Abercrombie spent much of his youth playing computer games, rolling dice and drawing maps of places that don't exist. He went on to Manchester University to study psychology, the study of the mind. The dice and the maps stopped, but the computer games continued. A job as a freelance editor gave him a great deal of time off, however, and gradually realising that he needed something more useful to do than playing computer games, in 2002 he sat down once again to write an epic fantasy trilogy based around the misadventures of thinking man's barbarian, Logen Ninefingers. This time, having learnt not to take himself too seriously in the 6 years since his first effort at telling this story, the results were a great deal more interesting. Since then, Joe has written several books, including The Heroes, Red Country, Half a King and Half the World. Welcome, Joe Abercrombie.
Welcome. Pleasure to be here.
Now, The Heroes in Red Country have a very different feel to Half a King and Half the World.
Oh, sure.
You've gone from Lord Grimdark to Youngling Grimdark.
Yeah.
Why the shift?
Well, I think I wrote 6 big, heavy, complicated, grim, dark,
No, they're not heavy.
epic
No,
fantasies.
not at all.
Right? And they were of a similar style, set in the same world, and had some of the characters in common. They're different styles to a degree, but similar certainly. And I just felt like I needed to try something different. Mm-hmm. And mostly I wanted to try my hand at something shorter, something tighter and more focused, I guess. Mm-hmm. Maybe with a single point of view. Yeah. And it seemed as if writing partly for younger readers might be a good way of doing that, or the two might fit well together nicely. Mm-hmm. A new world, a slightly younger audience, although I still want to write something that would very much work for my adult readers, or at least to a degree, for most of them I hope. And in the end I don't think there's that much difference between the kind of book I was reading, age 14, 12 to 16, and the kind of book I read as an adult. Mm-hmm. A lot of kids of that age read my adult stuff now, so it wasn't about doing something radically different. It was about kind of scaling down, I suppose, the approach I already had for a shorter, tighter, faster read, really.
Okay. You've kind of touched a little bit on the next question. Right. The Heroes in Red Country are very dark.
Sure.
Even in The Heroes, you make the moment of every person's death humorous. In contrast, the Shattered Sea books aren't, well, they're not warm and fuzzy, but they're not as dark as your earlier novels. So how difficult was it to change the flavour of your writing?
I don't think that hard. I mean, you know, I set out from the start to do something which had a slightly different tone. If it had been very similar, there wouldn't have been much point in shifting gears in a way. So I wanted to do something that was a little less pessimistic. I suppose my fantasy stuff, my adult fantasy, rose out of a lot of the very shiny and optimistic kind of books that I read when I was a kid. You know,
such as?
I suppose Dragonlance, David Eddings, you know, books of that kind. Classic heroic fantasy of the 80s and 90s, which was very shiny and simple and heroic and optimistic, and had very good guys and very bad guys. You were never confused between the two.
And the good guys always won.
The good guys always won, and got everything they deserved. I suppose I just felt like I wanted to write something that was the opposite of that, something to sit on the other side of the scales. Mm-hmm. Having written 6 books that were dark, cynical, unpleasant, very anti-heroic, I felt like, you know, I balanced it out enough, and I could maybe try to do something that was, you know, a little less dark. I think there's still a rich vein of cynicism in there, and perhaps the books, these 3 young adult books, get a little darker as time goes on as well.
Yeah. Your early books are quite hefty. Was it difficult to pare down your storytelling to a more slender form?
I think once I'd got in mind that I wanted to do that, it was relatively easy. I mean, it wasn't difficult. I just kind of had to make that change of mindset to say there's going to be one point of view rather than many alternating ones. One point of view, and to follow that one character through a relatively straightforward story. I suppose if you think that there are 6 characters in the first law, if you were to pull one of those characters out, their story might not be that long. So in a way I still feel it's a full story, but it's just one on its own, not interleaved with others. And I just tried to really pare down anything that was extraneous or unnecessary at the word level, at the paragraph level, at the kind of longer scene level, and try and make something that life and death on every page is how a friend of mine describes it. I find that a little bit too heavy duty, so I say a slap in the face on every page, something that just keeps you reading and really delivers constantly. And once I'd made the decision to do that, you know, I found it quite refreshing. You know, it's quite exciting, quite energising to work in that way. And you know, I wrote probably more quickly than I had done in the last couple of books. Yeah, so it was good. It was easy, if anything, to begin with. But of course, you know, very quickly, play becomes work.
Yes, there is that. Yeah. In Half a King, you wrote a character with a disability.
Sure.
What inspired Yavi?
It was directly inspired by, I was visiting Soft Play with my kids. I have 3 kids, and I sometimes...
Sorry, what's Soft Play?
Soft Play's it's a place where they have big mats and those ball bath things and slides, and the kids can throw themselves around on kind of soft furniture and not hurt themselves. Well, I can while they sit ignored. That's basically the plan. So I was there one day with my kids, and I noticed a kid who had a malformed hand. He was having some trouble joining in, and I was thinking about how difficult that must be to kind of grow up with that kind of disability. And then I started thinking how much more difficult it would be in the kind of medieval society I tend to work with, especially if it was a Saxon or a Viking style of society where standing in the shield wall and kind of holding a shield for the man beside you was really the definition of a man. It was what was expected of a man, especially a king or a leader. And so I started thinking about, you know, how disadvantaged you'd potentially be if in that society you couldn't hold the shield because you had a damaged hand, you couldn't draw a bow or pull an oar or tie a knot, do the things expected of a man. And that was really the genesis of the idea. And very quickly, once I'd had that idea, or once the idea had been laid in front of me, if you like, you know, the whole plot of the book pretty quickly defined itself. It was one of those great moments that happen all too rarely, where one idea follows another, and very quickly you've got a whole book, roughly speaking, laid out in front of you.
Well, you certainly captured the normal disability discrimination that happens in everyday life.
Right.
You capture that really well in Half a King.
Thanks. Yeah.
Did you actually go and talk to some people? Like, apart from seeing this kid trying to fit in and trying to join in, did you go and talk to people?
I don't think beyond, you know, people that I already knew and, you know, that worked with disabilities of one kind or another. I mean, I didn't specifically study that alone or talk to anyone, consult anyone specifically. I suppose I just tried to, you know, put myself in the mindset.
Yes.
I think there's a degree to which every adolescent, or most of them anyway, feel left out and outcast, and kind of it's about extrapolating what that experience might be, how isolated you might feel. So no, I mean, it was just trying to put myself in that position. I suppose, again, going back to the fantasy I read as a kid, you get very shiny, perfect heroes who even in battle, you know, manage to come through without any scars. Maybe a cosmetically attractive scar of some kind or other, just now and again. But rarely does anyone have a kind of long-term physical disability, a serious consequence, which of course many warriors would have had, who've been really seriously mauled. And so I think it's important to have characters who are kind of all kinds of characters with disabilities of all sorts, because I think medieval society would have been full of such people, as ours is.
Absolutely, yes. And half the world features Thorn.
Yes.
A teenage girl who wants to be a warrior.
Yeah.
So how did that come about?
I suppose the first book is really about this society has quite rigid gender divisions, but I wanted, having worked in a very kind of patriarchal, male-dominated society with the first law books, almost without thinking about it, I kind of imitated the societies that you often see in fantasy. I really wanted a society in which you could very easily get a lot of women into the book, of all types, powerful and influential women in all kinds of roles, without any effort. They'd just naturally be there. And so I suppose Viking society had quite a strong precedent of women being quite powerful and influential compared to the Christian Europe that surrounded them anyway.
Yes.
And so I kind of had this idea of women being responsible for the financial, for the household, for money, for knowledge, if you like. And so a queen becomes responsible for the household of the king, that is to say, the treasury of a country. So a queen becomes kind of the chancellor. And at the time these books are happening, money's becoming much more influential, much more important, and so women are becoming much more powerful than men in some cases. And that's a kind of central conceit of the story. Yavi's a man who, because of his hand, is unable to do the warrior thing that's expected, and so he's almost been pushed into a traditionally female role, if you like, of an advisor, a minister, a keeper of knowledge, a healer, you know, and he has to use those skills to fight his kind of physical adversaries, if you like. Thorn is the opposite. She's a girl who's attempting to make it as a warrior, who's touched by Mother War, as they say, who's kind of obsessed with fighting, who had a famous warrior for a father who was killed, and she's obsessed with becoming a warrior and avenging his memory. So she's a very driven, stubborn, if not to say pain in the arse sort of a character. Yeah.
Did you deliberately make them two sides of the one coin?
I think to a degree. You never really know until you start writing a character how they'll feel and what will come out of it. But it was certainly in my mind, yeah, that she'd be almost the reverse of Yavi in some ways, anyway. But also it was just born out of a desire to kind of try out some female characters and have some female characters as central in the books as I could do.
Yeah. You could be accused of ticking the PC boxes. What would you say to your critics?
I usually don't talk to my critics. I let them do their thing.
Move.
You know. I let them do their thing. That's up to them. In a way, it's not for me to say. You know, I think you've just got to write what you feel like writing. You could very easily write very male books. I did, you know, write a couple of very male books. I don't think anyone would really raise any eyebrows at that. But I feel it's a bit limiting.
Yes.
It's a bit disappointing. When people criticise my first few books for lack of female characters, for having a certain type of female character, I first of all was outraged, being the progressive, positive, modern man that I am. And then I started with daughters. Well, I didn't have daughters at that time, but I do now, obviously. And then I started to think about it and realised that, you know, there was a fair point being made, really. Yeah. That there was a lack of women around, and it would be a richer, more vivid world for just more women around incidentally. Because there have traditionally in the world been women around, believe it or not.
Funny, isn't it?
So I just since then I've you know made a conscious effort to try and get better at writing women, to try and get better at writing characters of different races, to have more mixed groups. Because to me, that it doesn't have to be a political statement. It's just a richer, more varied, more interesting cast. And straight away, if you work with a group of men, if you make a couple of those characters women, straight away you get different dynamics, you get different things happening within a scene. You can use the pronoun she, which is useful technically as a writer, and it becomes, I think, just a richer, more vivid world and cast for doing that. So I don't see the downside.
And you reach a broader audience.
Well, absolutely. Most readers are women, you know, and I think, sadly, female readers are a lot more broad-minded. They'll happily read books with male characters, probably because they've had to.
Yes.
You know, men are much less broad-minded. Men will often be quite turned off by having a female lead character, which always surprises me and just seems weird. I don't understand it. But women are the majority, more and more so. 2/3, 3/4 of your readership, maybe potential readership. Yeah. So yeah, you'd be commercially a bit mad, I think, to willfully turn them away by, you know, not representing female characters in your story.
And Brienne of Tarth is such a popular character in pop culture now.
Yeah. And you know, those sort of characters, I think, we're fascinated by. You don't want to get too drawn into having endless kick-ass, badass women, because, you know, I think a constant diet of them is also a bit unrealistic, a bit boring, in the same way as a constant diet of kick-ass, badass men is a bit dull. You want a range and you know, all kinds of different women in the books. That's what I've tried to do over time. It takes work, I think, but getting there.
Yeah, well, you have the Golden Queen, and you have, and I'm terrible at remembering names, but you have Yavi's former betrothed.
Yes, Isrian, yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
and the ship captain, Shudik Shiram, and others.
Yeah, so you've got a range of women in this book.
I try to have, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And the third book, again, has a few more different types of women again, so...
I'll ask you more about that in
a minute. Yeah.
Most men want to pretend female menstrual cycles don't exist. But you've gone to the other extreme. I wondered if you needed more blood in a scene or something.
I don't know, I just felt like, you know, periods are part of the experience of adolescent girls, as I understand it, so they're quite a significant part. Amazingly, I had a review by a guy saying, he was very upset about the immodest depiction of menstruation. And as a
Well,
father of
because
daughters,
it was mentioned at all.
because it was mentioned at all, and as a father of daughters, he knew that ladies would prefer it's not mentioned. You see, and I just find that bizarre. I mean, to me, writing is about trying to give a truthful picture of what someone's experience of life is, and so that's just one thing that I think is fair game to come up. It's not something I make a huge deal out of, but yeah, it's in there, as I think things should be, you know, of that kind.
Yeah, well, I mean, it annoys me when people go for, you know, like a week-long trip on a bird with, you know, how do they go to the toilet?
Yeah.
You know, that...
The lack of people going to the toilet is baffling in fantasy to me, but I've tried to, again, put that right by, you know, obsessive talk of the toilet constantly. Yeah.
Now, we've got Yavi in Half a King, and I don't have the retail cover, but yeah, I bought what I got.
Yeah.
And we have Thorn, and I can't remember the guy's
Brand,
name.
yeah.
Brand in Half the World.
Yeah.
What can you tell us about Half a War?
We have 3 characters in Half a War. One, then 2, then 3. So we have Princess Skara, who is a much more traditional female sort of character. A dispossessed princess whose land has been overrun by enemies, and has to kind of use her wits to steer her alliance towards recapturing her land and keep her head above water while surrounded by a lot of dangerous and powerful warriors.
Yes.
We have Wraith, who's a sort of child soldier, if you like, a guy who's been trained to kill effectively and carry a sword for a king, and is starting to become worried about the violence he's done. And we have Col, who's a significant character in Half the World, who's Father Yavi's apprentice. So there's those 3, and they're kind of my 3 points of view on this political mess that is the war they become embroiled in. So it's kind of quite a political book, a bit more complicated. Half King obviously is the single story of Yavi, and then Half the World is kind of a quest story, though there's 2 points of view there together most of the time, so it follows a relatively straightforward journey. This book is much more complicated. There's kind of 3 different stories going on and interweaving, with bloody and horrific consequences, of course.
Yes, of course. Well, you have to be true to yourself.
Absolutely.
One question about this world.
Yeah.
When I first started reading it, I thought, oh, it's a future Earth, and the elves are really modern men.
Yeah.
Is it actually a future Earth, or is it a different world, a different universe? Because in Half a World, I started thinking that technology, that elven bracelet, it's like I could not for the life of me imagine what it was.
Yeah.
So...
Well, I try not to be, too specific, because I think, I try to stick to the experience of the characters, and the characters obviously wouldn't know either way. There's hints in there, there's clues for the sharp-eyed, and there's more in the next book. So I don't think it's ever totally definitive, but people who look at the map carefully may see some similarities to somewhere. Who can say?
Yeah, I did wonder. Paul Weimer asks, what have you learnt writing YA that you intend to apply to future adult, in inverted commas, adult novels and stories?
Well, I mean, certainly pacing. I think Half a King was a really interesting study for me in how tightly you could cut something down. I suspect I will, you never know, but I'll probably write shorter books in future, not necessarily a lot shorter, but I think if I came back to another adult trilogy, I would write slightly shorter books, maybe splitting the difference between these. Because I think now I could still cover the same ground and do it just a bit more tightly and concisely. So there's that. I think with every book you write, you learn a little something new. So it was good to work again with a variety of female characters. I think in the first one I tended to have quite manly women, quite violent women generally. So it's been interesting to try my hand at some sort of softer types of character. So I've certainly learned that too, and a little bit about world building as well, actually, because the world I had in the first law just developed over time. It was a load of ideas cribbed together over years and years, and I just started writing and then improvised as I went. With these books, I much more came up with a concept that suited the book, suited the story as I was going, and I think the world is maybe a bit more vivid and coherent because of that. So I think if I started off in a new world again, I don't know when that would happen, but I'd certainly be a lot more confident doing that now.
Cool. Your novels might be classified as fantasy, but you don't necessarily include actual magic.
Sure.
What are your thoughts on fantasy as a genre and genres as categories?
Wow. I mean, they're always fuzzy, aren't they? They're always fuzzy around the edges. What makes something fantasy, what doesn't. I think, when you see it really in the end, it's very hard to define. Even the kind of subcategory of what is epic fantasy. You can always say, well, Robert Jordan's Wheel of Time, that is epic fantasy.
Well, it's certainly epic.
It's certainly epic, it's certainly fantasy. Some things it's easy to say they're epic fantasy. Other things that are at the corners and the edges, say Richard Morgan's Land Fit for Heroes, they start to become, is that sword and sorcery, is epic fantasy, is it a bit of one, a bit of the other? It starts to always be fuzzy around the edges, and when you ask the question, what is fantasy? It's often about the argument that the person defining it is trying to make. So people will often obsessively include stuff in. So they'll say A Christmas Carol is fantasy because it's got like ghosts in it and stuff. For me, I'm not sure how helpful it is to have a category that's so wide that it includes everything from China Miéville to Dickens, or Midsummer Night's Dream. So it's an impossible question to answer in a way. It all depends on the question you're asking. I mean, a genre like grimdark, which now has appeared a little bit, obviously. No one can tell it well, yeah. I mean, I use that as a joke, but originally it was a joke, and now people have started to use it seriously to kind of refer to George R.R. Martin-esque gritty fantasy, I suppose. But everyone who uses the term uses it in a totally different way and means a totally different set of books. You never know what they're talking about. So it's interesting to have these arguments about what goes where and in what box, but I'm not sure how useful it is in the end.
Yeah, well, I suppose it's part of the price you pay for living in a postmodern society.
Well, indeed, yeah.
You have certain views on elitist literature.
Oh, do I?
Well, I have listened to, one or two interviews in preparation. Would you like to share?
What, views on elitist literature?
Yes.
Well, I think I'm kind of... I try to take a live and let live sort of attitude to anything like this these days. Because there's not much to be gained from any other attitude. But generally I feel, I get frustrated with people ruling out certain kinds of books, or I think we should be inclusive. Let 1,000 flowers bloom and 100 schools of thought contend, or whatever it is Mao said, something along those lines.
Absolutely.
So if people want to, obsess over a certain style, then that's for them. I'd rather not. I'd rather include everything. Yeah.
Because different horses, different courses.
Yeah, absolutely. But some things that people hold up as being great, I find kind of dull.
Yeah.
Some things that I find dull, other people enjoy hugely. So who's to say? There are many, many opinions out there.
Yeah.
One for every person, you might say.
Yes. Yes. You've finished writing Half a War, haven't you?
Finished is an interesting word, isn't it? Well, especially when it comes to books. I mean, you can finish and get to the end, but still have quite a lot of work to do. There is a finished... I am nearly finished. I mean, I had a big edit this time. So Half the World, my editors loved it. I was amazed. I was very unsure. They loved it. Didn't have much to say. Hardly needs anything. So this third one, I was pretty sure was great. Handed it in. Not so great as I thought it had been.
Red pen?
A fair amount of red pen. Well, no, red pen's fine because red pen tends to be specific, and you can either say yes or no. This was just a lot of general comments, a lot of quite big major comments. So it's been a busy month, kind of trying to sort it out and get it ready, and I'm just finishing off a kind of pass through to smooth it off and try and sort it all out. But it's getting there, and hopefully it's due to be published in July, and hopefully we'll still make that date. Certainly in the UK. America's a little harder because they need a bit more lead time. They have kind of bigger spaces, bigger lead times. So it may shift back into August in the States, but we'll see how long it takes to get it copy edited. If I send it back in a few days and my editors say, "Oh, this is superb now. You've really sorted it out for us," which I hope they do, then it should all be fine. If they kind of say, "Oh, there's still a few things to look at," then it may drift back a little further.
Okay.
But it's good.
This is good. And you're doing this while you're on tour?
Yeah. Yeah.
And what other projects are you working on? What comes next after Half a War?
Well, I've kind of, every time I finish anything, I tell my wife I'll take a break now.
Yeah.
Become more involved in the child rearing and all those things that you're supposed to do.
Yes.
And I always then get dragged into doing the next thing, so I do need to have a period where I don't do much. I've kind of put a lot of things off, saying as soon as this book's finished I'll have time and I'll do them, and now I've got, you know, a totally full schedule of things I've got to finish off, interviews that I've got to do and little bits and pieces of business. But I've got a collection of short stories to finish, so there's about 9 or 10 written, I think, and I need to write 2 or 3 more, and then that'll be done. That'll probably come out next year. They're all First Law world stories. And then in theory it'll be another trilogy in the First Law world, back to the adult stuff. Ready to get my hands dirty again, I would say.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for talking to Dark Matter.
Thank you, it's been a pleasure. Thanks a lot.